Hi, I'm Sue Hillyard, and this talk is being recorded for EA Zoom meetings on May 4th, 2023. As always, I have a lot of information packed into this presentation, so please feel free to ask questions. I'll try to present it clearly and will stop periodically to ask for comments. Joining me today is Jordyn Smith, who is going to give her EA perspective on each of the states. Hi, Jordyn.
Hey, Sue.
Okay, for reference, here's a chart of the solar eclipse last week in the final degree and minutes of Aries, conjunct Jupiter and square Pluto in the first degree of Aquarius. For the eclipses, I've used a 0 Aries house system so that it can be generic for any location. Jordyn's going to give us a brief EA summary of the eclipses. Go ahead, Jordyn.
Okay, yeah. So with this solar eclipse that happened on the 19th, we have to keep in mind that this was a new moon, which is what solar eclipses are, is whenever a new moon occurs on one of the planetary nodes. And this one, it was a hybrid. So also, the new moon was occurring at 29 degrees Aries, and Pluto was square the nodal axis at this time, with the resolution node being the south node in Scorpio and ruling that Pluto. So with Pluto and Aquarius, we're on a collective level. This is about the collective wanting to liberate from a lot of social conditioning that is not in resonance with the collective growth at this point in time and the collective evolution. And so there's a need to really look at that south node happening in Scorpio in combination with Pluto. So getting to the bottom of what type of values, what type of conditioning do we need to liberate from, rebel against, get to the bottom of. And it's really with the north node in Taurus looking at, the collective values and the collective needs, needing to understand also on a physical level with Earth, which is, part of Taurus, needing to look at what we're needing to liberate from and how we have and how we have utilized natural resources and exposing the reasons why we have used them the way that we have used them. With the new moon being at 29 degrees and its ruler Mars in Cancer, it's looking at what new cycles we need to culminate on one hand and what cycles do we need to end on the other, revolving around the identity of the collective right now. And so it's really looking at the underbelly of how all of, we're looking at government issues, we're looking at policies, we're looking at natural resources, and we're needing to look at how this has affected our relationship to Gaia and to the collective at whole. Sue?
That's great. Thank you, Jordyn. And here's a chart for the lunar eclipse in Scorpio tomorrow, ruled by a just stationed retrograde Pluto in Aquarius. You can also see that the sun is smack in the middle between Mercury retrograde and Uranus. Mercury will station direct before perfecting another conjunction with the North Node. The recent Mercury North Node conjunction occurred on April 5th. Okay, Jordyn, over to you.
Okay. Sorry, my internet's just a little unstable with these storms.
Yeah.
Okay, so
all part of the eclipse season.
the need to really understand yet again what there's a lot can be exposed at this point in time in the collective. This is a Scorpio function. It's a full moon. That's why it's a lunar eclipse. It's happening on that south node of Scorpio. So a lot can be coming up within the collective to be exposed. This is, you know, the need to liberate, the need to be objective about this, with Pluto ruling that moon and the south node as well. And there's also a need to understand a new set of values, a new set of needs on a collective level to bring forth. And with Jupiter, you know, sextile Venus, there's a need to learn about more natural law as a way to include new needs, or it's about recovering what's natural, what are natural ways of living as opposed to being destructive here on the planet. What are more natural ways that are, it's natural law, like giving, sharing, and inclusion. What are ways that we can all live together harmoniously? So the need is to really, with Pluto and Aquarius, to evaluate all of these dynamics through objectivity in order to be able to liberate from it and have some type of revolution that, you know, and this doesn't have to be like it's more of a renaissance to me that could happen, or a revolution, but I need to understand what it is that we need to do while we're living here on this planet in order to cooperate, in order to be there for other people. This is about our tribe. It's about community. What is it that we're needing, what's needing to be exposed in a plethora of ways in order for this actualization to happen? It's about, you know, being integrable as well. As soon as Pluto retrogrades back into Capricorn, we're going to be looking at, you know, more kind of government structures even more. But a lot of this has to deal with the collective's needs, natural values, and also our natural resources and what we, because we're in relationship with the earth. Like, it's not just us people here. Whether it be government, lies, secrets, we're already starting to feel that with the Scorpio. And it's so that way we can liberate from it, because the people or the collective they're going to mirror the people who are in charge. And so there's a need to really look at all of this and then to align the collective with more natural principles, is what this chart is really stating to me in a transpersonal way.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Okay, and this shows both of the lunar eclipses that have been on those middle degrees of Taurus and Scorpio, the last one having taken place on midterm election day here in the US. In the previous talk I gave for EA Zoom meetings, I spoke about a phenomenon that I had discovered where every 205 years we've had a Mars retrograde over the same degrees as this most recent one in Gemini, as well as eclipses at the same degrees and dates as these two. So 205 years ago, in 1817, Mars turned retrograde and direct in the same degrees of Gemini, and there was a solar eclipse on the south node in the exact opposite degree of last season's lunar eclipse. Then 205 years before that, in 1612, Mars also went retrograde and direct within a degree of this time, followed by a lunar eclipse November 8th on the north node. And in 1407, the degrees and dates were very close again, and that time it was a solar eclipse on the south node on the exact degree. These eclipses and Mars retrogrades were each time within a degree of this year's eclipse and retrograde. I've put the eclipses all on a 0-degree Aries chart, so the signs are in the same position for all of the charts. And I went into much more detail in that talk than I will today, but we'll put a link to the talk in the description of the video on YouTube. Interestingly, Mississippi was admitted to the Union in December of 1817 after this particular solar eclipse, and while Mars was still retrograde. Jordyn, do you have any thoughts on this particular slide, or shall we move on to Mississippi statehood chart?
I am good with moving on to Mississippi statehood chart.
Okay, here we go. It seems like, to me, that we're revisiting issues that have been in the ethers since at least the time that Mississippi was admitted, if not long before. One of the comments I've seen about the founding of our nation is that, along with rejecting the idea of the monarchy, we should have also dropped slavery. Instead, we are living with the mentality that somehow we are not all equal. With Mars spending just over 7 months in Gemini from August 21st, 2022 until March 25th of 2023, we were transported right back into these issues. The charts I've used are from Sirius software data, except for Oklahoma's, which Jordyn had a different time and location for. And since she lives there and has done loads of research and teaching about it, we went with that. And in the description for Mississippi, Sirius states that this data was from Mark Penfield and the chart was rectified. Jordyn, please go ahead with your EA analysis of Mississippi.
Okay. All right, I'm going to kind of slow down just because of how my internet's being. Pluto in this chart specifically, Sue, you did a really good job of talking about some of the dynamics with Mississippi. One thing to keep in mind is that this was a state that came into inception because of slavery. It was one of the most wealthy states in the Union of its time whenever it came into inception. And a big issue that was had was that they conceded in the 1800s. You know, I forget the date. I have it in my notes somewhere, but because of the abolishment of slavery, they were really against it because it would affect there were a lot of, I'm just going to say it, there were a lot of white people, especially rich white men, who felt like if slavery was abolished, then they wouldn't be as rich or have land anymore, because enslaved people would be free to make their own money and to own their own land, and they didn't want to have that happen. It's really interesting. We all know that cotton is a natural resource, and that is what this state was built upon, was the enslavement of African American people in order to produce cotton. So I wanted to say that in context with this chart, Pluto is in Pisces in the 12th house, and it is at 23 degrees. So we can see that there is a culmination of certain dynamics wanting to happen and come into fruition. We can also see with Pisces, this can be about natural resources on one hand, so can Venus. But I bring this up because they from the Union at a certain point. And so this was trying to culminate these dynamics. Pluto is also square its ruler, Neptune, which is in Sagittarius in the 9th house. And this also speaks to this state being a state that was made around wanting to colonize African Americans into, which is much of the United States history. I'm not saying anything new here. But they were with dogma, which can be a 9th house issue. And where to Neptune conjunct Mercury, there was a need to really listen to the people of that culture, 9th house, Sag, and to understand what their values were and what their natural truths were. That's also with Neptune conjunct Jupiter, conjunct Mercury, in order to bring more inclusivity to this state. I think it's really interesting. Mars here is at 15 degrees. It's retrograde. It's in Gemini. It is conjunct the north node of Venus and of Uranus. And it is in a yod with the south node in Scorpio and with the moon in Capricorn in the 10th house. And to me, this really speaks to the need to get to the bottom of what patriarchal values are as opposed to what natural values are, and the need to what that is, especially with Mars conjunct that north node of Venus and Uranus. There's a need to liberate from prior values that are is ruled by that Mercury in the 9th house in Sagittarius. And so this is a need to really be able to utilize natural law as opposed to patriarchal law, and that is part of that Capricorn moon in this yod as well, being ruled by Saturn and Pisces in the 11th house. So there's a need to liberate from the delusions of why the state became a state in the first place, and to bring forth more natural truths and timeless principles, and to really listen to the collective as a whole. That's to the group, Saturn in the 11th house, and to understand, you know, what it is that the people are needing, what the tribe is needing, as opposed to the roost right now. And so also with this yod, the south node being in Scorpio, there's a need to get to the bottom of and to understand the motivations behind the government wanting to utilize natural resources in the way that they have, and how that's affected the people and the collective there as a whole.
Wow. Very well said. Thank you.
No problem, Sam.
Okay, so this is the November 8th, 2022 lunar eclipse around Mississippi's chart, showing that it fell across their nodal axis, indicating a nodal return in the 2nd and 8th houses. Speaking to your resources. On August 31st, 2022, CNN reported that recent torrential rain, coupled with years of water system issues, have resulted in a crisis in Jackson, Mississippi, where the city doesn't have enough water to fight fires, flush toilets, or even hand out to residents in need. Jackson's main water treatment facility began failing Monday. That's Monday of before this August 31st, 2022, according to Governor Tate Reeves. The National Guard was called up to help distribute bottled water as crews worked to get to the water treatment plant back online, state officials said.
I want to speak about one thing on here, Sue, that
Sure.
jumped out to me while you were talking, if you don't mind.
Sure.
So Pluto and Chiron are in a balsamic conjunction as well. So that's kind of a triple signature of wanting to culminate dynamics. And you can see that the inception of this state and how they've chose to treat the people will actually denying them and abandoning them, right? Because the South Node and Scorpio in the 8th house can be about an abandonment wound. But there is a trine from that to that South Node, from Chiron to the South Node. If the state were to pull back the curtain and really listen to the people, which is pulling in that North Node being in Taurus, which is the function of listening, about what it is that they're actually needing, especially with this lunar eclipse having the moon and Uranus conjunct that North Node, it would have helped with that Chiron wounding, with the people not feeling continuously disillusioned by being abandoned by the government and not heard.
Wow, yeah. Yeah. So here I've added the progress chart to show that the Mars retrograde in this eclipse chart falls exactly on the progressed Mercury. hopefully
I got it, Sue.
okay, hopefully with the media talking about these issues, they can start to be resolved and healed. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And then the Aries solar eclipse fell in their first house, with the transiting nodes conjunct their progressed ones, and Mercury with Uranus conjunct their north node. And then tomorrow's lunar eclipse features Venus conjunct progressed third house Gemini Mercury, where transiting Mars was last time. Let's hope we start to hear some good news from this. Any comments or questions before we move on to our next date?
You know, Sue, on that chart previously with that eclipse that's happening tomorrow, it definitely hits on what you were talking about in regard to the media being more boisterous about this with the Gemini energy and then the ninth house energy that's going on. But with that Neptune square transiting Venus during this eclipse, it's like this could be you know, things might have to get worse before they get better in order to be heard. And that's the sadness about this.
Yes.
And sometimes it takes, I remember Jeffrey Wolf Green talked about, and this is something that you can see with Venus dynamics a lot of times in combination with with Pisces, you know, it's kind of that natural yacht that goes on, but sometimes it takes an extreme to counteract an extreme. And to me, this chart kind of symbolizes, in order for fruition to happen, it might just be that an extreme has to happen in order to counteract the extreme that's going on right now.
Yes, I agree, and especially with their Neptune in Sagittarius, square that. I think there's a lot more going on behind the scenes than
I do too. And I think that that's going to get exposed as well with this particular eclipse happening.
I hope so, because there's a lot, and it's been going on for so long, and it definitely needs to
Yeah,
come out, and we need to heal from it.
absolutely.
Okay, moving on to Montana, who has a birthday on the same day of the year as the prior lunar eclipse on the US midterm election day. Of particular note to me, they were also born around the same time of the Neptune-Pluto conjunction of the late 19th century, which I mentioned because we had a couple of lunar eclipses around that sensitive area where, coincidentally, is the USA Sibley Uranus. Jordyn, would you like to give a little bit
Sure.
about Montana?
Sure. So whenever I was doing research on Montana, I was looking at how, I mean, with all of these charts, how that particular state came to be. And with this one, the state was built on, it goes back to this is something we're going to see with all of these charts. There's a couple of key things. Destruction of natural resources. We're looking at things like manifest destiny, so colonization of people and enslavement. So with this chart in particular, we see Pluto and Neptune are in a conjunction, both retrograde. They're in the 7th house in the sign of Gemini. And so there was a need to really understand how to be able to, there was a lack of equanimity in regards to the indigenous people, and there was a need to learn about this. There was a need to listen to the truth, of what was occurring. This is having to deal with the 7th house and the Neptune dynamic. And we're also dealing with, you know, especially because the sun is in Scorpio, it is in the 8th house. This is, I mean, the 12th house. This is dealing with, you know, needing to be able to merge resources as opposed of taking them. And with Pluto being in the 7th house, the North Node, Cancer in the 7th house, the South Node in a conjunction with Jupiter in the 1st, there is a need to create equanimity and to be able to exist with all cultures. This is also pertaining to Saturn being in Virgo in the 9th house. Instead of trying to indoctrinate cultures into a certain viewpoint, there was a need to really listen to other cultures or other people. And this is a thread that is still running through this state right now, that we'll be able to see that there's been quite a bit of an imbalance that has been created since the inception of this state, dealing with the culture. We can also see this with Libra being on this 11th house. You know, Venus is conjunct Uranus there in the sign of Libra. And so there is trauma that has occurred within the state because of the imbalances that have been created. And it's about beliefs and needs and viewpoints, and how they're valuing things based upon their beliefs, which Saturn in the 9th house in Virgo, we're looking at more Judeo-Christian kind of typology here. And, you know, with that Saturn being ruled by Mercury in the 11th house of Scorpio, there's a need to get to the bottom of what is an actual truth as opposed to a belief. What is fact versus opinion, and the need to really liberate from the things that are more opinion based rather than factual. And with the South Node being ruled by that Saturn in Virgo and it's conjunct Jupiter, this just it's a repeating signature of more patriarchal values and distortions that have perpetuated this imbalance within this state. And so there's really not equanimity with the people or with natural resources at that. We can see how that's happened with the South Nodes of Saturn and Pluto both falling in that 2nd house. So there's a need to, with the North Node in the 7th house being ruled by the moon in Taurus, take it one step at a time, have sincere intentions of getting to the bottom of what the values are, to not shame or judge people or to make them feel guilty for who they are, and to need to bring equanimity within the state.
Great. Yes. That's a great commentary on the resources, because Montana definitely has a lot of natural resources that are being usurped, shall we say.
Oh yeah. I mean, they were a bottom and bust state, you know. For those that don't know what that means, people would come in, use the boom and bust. They would come in, use the resources, create a boom within on a monetary sense, and we can see all of this in this chart. And then the bust part of the boom and bust is they would leave, and they would leave it in destruction, and they would leave it, they would abandon and not clean up after themselves. And that really speaks to this, you know, 12th house sun and Scorpio as well. So, and the need to really liberate from that. And it's all stemming from a whole completely different value system than the people who were naturally there in the first place.
All good points. And then before we go on to the eclipses around here, here's the, for reference, the USA Sibley. And Jordyn, did you want to say a few words about the USA Sibley chart?
I feel like this chart has been gone over a lot, and so I'm just gonna leave it there.
Okay, yeah, it is, but it's here for the recording. If you want to come back and, for reference, you can come back and take a look at it. And what my point was is that here is the Uranus at 8 degrees of Gemini, and also the USA Mars in Gemini, and so the recent Mars retrograde kind of went in over both of these and stationed very close to the Uranus. Okay, so this chart with the eclipse on Montana's birthday around the outside shows that asteroid Karma is conjunct Montana's natal sun. So here we have asteroid Karma within a degree of the sun of Montana. And I find it fascinating that the eclipse fell, on their birthday, on election day. And it was midterm elections for the US, and all of the seats in the Montana House and half of the Montana Senate seats were up for election that day. The recent solar eclipse was opposite natal Mercury in the 11th house. In mundane astrology, the 11th house refers to legislation and the legislature. On the day after this eclipse, the State House Speaker refused to let a transgender lawmaker speak on the chamber's floor until she apologizes for saying lawmakers would have blood on their hands if they passed a law to ban gender-affirming medical care for transgender youth. Representative Zoe Zephyr asked a court this past Monday to allow for her return to the House floor after she was silenced and barred for chiding her Republican colleagues over legislation to restrict gender-affirming health care and for encouraging protesters. And on a side note, the Northern Lights were visible in Montana on the 23rd, which is something that usually happens after a solar flare or a geomagnetic storm, but they were, pretty far south. And
I think
then
it's oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I think it's interesting that on the 9th house cusp, which is at 13 degrees Leo, so 9th house can be about our belief structures. It can also be natural law or higher learning. But Leo's on it, which can be this, kind of elitism that we see. And that 9th house cusp actually squares that sun, which the sun is symbolizing the need to dissolve those and get to the bottom of it. And with that south node on Mercury, while this was occurring with the the silencing of the transgender representative, oftentimes we also see transgender in the Leo Aquarius axis as well. And so there's like this need to, this is kind of a redo, revisit, repeat in some type of way with that south node happening on that Mercury. And it kind of goes back into the thread of the whole Pluto paradigm of Pluto being retrograde and Gemini being ruled by that Mercury, and the need to bring in equanimity and get to the bottom of what elitism is and what more the difference between a belief and a fact is, with Leo, that Leo cusp on the 9th house squaring that sun. So that sun would be an integration point. And you can also see with the new moon occurring at 29 degrees Aries in the 5th house, which kind of loops back around to that Leo archetype, is that there's a need to culminate this in order to, bring more inclusivity and co-creation within the state Senate. And, that new moon is ruled by that Mars and Cancer. So really getting to the bottom of, you know, what constitutes the security of the state Senate. Like, is it going to be about giving, sharing, and inclusion, or is it going to be more of elitism? And I think that that's really fascinating to look at this chart.
And something that just popped into my mind is, guess where the Venus retrograde is going to be this summer? In Leo, in their
There,
ninth house.
there you
So,
go.
I think we're probably going to be revisiting this more than once.
Absolutely. And so that'll probably square that sun again. It's most definitely going to square that Mercury, you know. I can't remember what degree that Venus is going retrograde at. Do
What,
you?
28 or 29? I think yeah.
Okay,
20.
so it's going to pass over their karma and their sun at least twice, correct?
Yeah, square it. Yes. Uh-huh.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah.
So it'll square it
Three
twice.
three
So
times.
3 times. So that'll be really interesting to see what goes down during that period of time, especially with this representative.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah. And then we'll have one more eclipse in what is it, in Taurus? Is it a lunar eclipse? I think at 10 degrees of Taurus, I think
Uh,
next fall.
there's a Libra happening on the 14th.
That's the solar eclipse, right? And then
Yeah, I'm
and
looking
then
at the,
and then I think the lunar eclipse is on like the 28th or something like that, at
yeah.
around 10 degrees. So
Mhm.
it'll be on their Juno. So which
Fascinating.
I have heard is about activism. Juno is
It
involved in
can be,
activism.
and it's definitely, Juno has a Scorpio feel to it as well. So it can be about, you know, you see it a lot with karmic dynamics, like karmic dynamics with individuals, or in wanting to work out the karmic dynamic. So it's like whenever two people or contracts merge, you know, there's something that they're wanting to get to the bottom of that maybe prior that they weren't able to.
Wow. Wow. So all right. So more will be revealed, I'm quite sure.
Absolutely.
And then the lunar eclipse tomorrow will be within 7 arc minutes of a conjunction to their asteroid Karma and the 12th house sun of Montana. So, I'm sure there will be more news. We're going to have to do a part 2 on this.
Yeah. And it's interesting because Mars is going to be conjunct their Chiron in that 8th house, which is square their Uranus in Libra. So, you know, something could be exposed in order to create an access point to get more equality happening or occurring.
I hope so.
I do too.
Yeah. Okay. And then, and 2.5 years ago, for this lunar eclipse conjunct the USA Sibley Uranus and Montana's Pluto, the sun was conjunct their first house progressed Mars. The first house in mundane astrology is the people, as the moon also signifies the people, and the sun is persons of authority. That year, they elected their first Republican governor since 2005. And then 6 months later, this mirror lunar eclipse was conjunct their first house progressed Mars and opposite the USA Sibley Uranus, Montana's Pluto, and their sun. So, any other comments or questions before we move on to the next state? And if you have questions, you can put them in the chat, and maybe Robin, you can monitor them. And pose them to us. Okay, the state of Arkansas has Taurus-Scorpio nodes and Mars at 15 degrees Taurus. So the November 8th, 2022 lunar eclipse was conjunct their north node and Mars. Tomorrow's eclipse will be opposite their Mars. Jordyn, go ahead.
Okay. I feel like, you know, I gotta be honest, doing these states like makes me look at the dark history of the United States, you know, in some ways. And like, it makes me have a hope for change to occur with all that's occurring and with Pluto going into Aquarius. So usually I'm such a much more upbeat person, but each time I go over this, I'm like, oh man, like this is heavy. Pluto in the eighth house. Okay, so first let me start with Arkansas. Was the reason why it came into inception was because it's known as a slave state. That is the basis for creating that state, and it was the basis for taking the land for, yet again, natural resources and pushing the indigenous culture out in order to utilize that land for fur trade. So with Pluto in Aries in the eighth house, we're looking at, on a collective level, a need to get to the bottom of why. What was the bottom of why they went into inception, and the need to pull in the polarity point of Libra in the second house, one, listening to the people, to creating values that are more inclusive in nature and more balanced with that Libra point. And you can see with the south node of Mars and falling in that second house, Libra, being ruled by Venus and Leo, and sextile to it, that it was, and that's in the 12th house, that, you know, there was a lot of ulterior motivations, and it perpetuated imbalances within the society at large. Within the collective consciousness, there's a disillusionment that happened to the original people there, with Venus being in Leo in the 12th house. It was also more of elitist values that perpetuated the inception of the state. It's also interesting to note that Pluto is square the moon and Mercury. And so there's a need to liberate from what has created the insecurity within the collective there, and a need to relearn and to act on the tension that occurs within this state, to implement new ways of creating security for the community at large. Pluto and the Saturn's north node conjunct Jupiter. And so this is really about looking at more matriarchal natural truths, natural law, and a need to liberate from more patriarchal standards in order for this to happen. I wanted to say, so the south node of Scorpio in the third house also speaks to the transmigration of people being kicked out and then abandoning them. And also the north node in Taurus conjunct Mars in a balsamic conjunction also speaks to, and it being ruled by Venus, and it's just this repeating signature of needing to enact more natural ways of being, natural values, natural principles on a collective level. You can see that they're wanting to culminate on one hand the more kind of elitist thinking and values, and on the other hand wanting to start a new cycle of being able to activate more natural principles as a way to set the tone for this state. But there's a need to get to the bottom of why it came into inception. And I think that it's really interesting because if you see what's going on in that state right now, they're trying to erase like critical race theory. They're, you know, not wanting to listen to the people, and it's a way to not deal with what their bottom line is in this chart.
Good points, all of them. And I have to say that, full disclosure on my part, I did choose all of these states because there was something going on, politically, and, a lot of action and a lot of news stories. And also a little bit of further disclosure. My Mars is conjunct Jordyn's Pluto in Scorpio. So, we went there on this. Okay.
Yeah, well, I'm just sticking to the facts of what I researched. So,
Exactly. Exactly. And the facts speak to the chart. They mesh. They go together.
Yeah, and I also want to tell you, look at the south node of Sagittarius falling in that fourth house. You can see, and this goes back to that moon square Pluto, that the insecurity occurred by the traumatization of natural law that happened whenever this state came into inception, and that is ruled by their Jupiter.
The south node of Uranus in the fourth house. Yes. Okay.
In Sagittarius, yeah. And
Yeah.
so it's actually like this need to go back to the way that it was prior to the state becoming a state, in the sense of values.
Yeah.
And it also speaks to how the belief system has created insecurity within the collective and traumatized them.
True. Yeah. Another good point. Okay. Last November 8th, Mars retrograde was conjunct Arkansas's sun. The eclipse was conjunct transiting Uranus, and Venus was conjunct both their progressed Venus and the south node. That day, Sarah Sanders was elected the first woman governor of Arkansas, and the youngest, too. The prior lunar eclipse, in the middle of a lunar nodal return, was conjunct Arkansas's ninth house north node. A few weeks after that, Sarah Sanders handily won the governor's race primary.
So, okay. Christina, I saw that you said something in the chat, and we'll take a peek at it in just a second. I did want to say, so with Sarah Sanders being elected, she's the one who's wanting to take out critical race theory. So speaking to, can you see my mouse? I don't know if you guys can.
No,
Okay.
we can't see yours.
Okay, that's fine. Don't worry, because I can just speak to this. Whenever we're looking at these repeating signatures and we're sticking to the Pluto paradigm of this actual chart, remember how we were talking about, the Leonian, Sagittarian kind of dynamics involving like patriarchal values? Well, Pluto is transiting this fifth house. And that outside solar eclipse whenever she got elected. So she was someone who's, this isn't her first run around, this is another lifetime repeating theme. And it's interesting, all of the Aquarius energy as well. This is like Jeffrey Wolf Green, and it's happening in the sixth house. Jeffrey Wolf Green talked about how within Aquarius there can be social dinosaurs, like the people who want to keep it the way that it used to be. And I think that it's really interesting that signature is in this chart right now. And then there's also that the north node conjuncting that Mars, and then Sun right there that you pointed out.
Can you see my mouse?
Yes, I can. So this was an
Okay.
opportunity on one hand to liberate in newer natural principles.
So Jordyn, you froze for a minute
My
there.
internet's a little unstable. So
Yeah. You said,
yeah,
so this was an
so
opportunity.
this was okay, so this was an opportunity with Uranus conjunct the North Node, which was conjunct their North Node, to really liberate from some of these prior values and to elect someone that would be more in alignment with what the collective was needing at this time. I feel like it would be really interesting to see how many people came out to vote of what and what. I mean, that's a little political, but I'm just speaking for my personal, I'm like, oh, I want to go look this up now. But yes, so it's interesting that, I mean, you see these repeating signatures that are happening with these transits in direct correlation to the repeating signatures that they're trying to liberate from in their natal chart, is my point.
Yeah. And the liberation and evolution is not overnight. You know, it's and sometimes it has to be brought up, and exposed in order for the healing to occur. So
Well, it goes back to that. It takes an extreme to counteract an extreme sometimes.
yeah, exactly. And yeah, I saw Christina. I saw your comment. Christina asked about the Electoral College, saying the Electoral College is a shadowy remnant of slavery that continues to impact the country. It shackles the impetus for change. And then she asked if we had a chart for the Electoral College to compare with these states and Sibley. That would be an interesting thing to do. I didn't. I didn't do that today, but something to remember for part two. Okay. Any other comments before we move on? So now we're going to look at Oklahoma, which is where Jordyn lives and teaches astrology classes about their chart. Oklahoma's Mercury is at 18 degrees Scorpio, 14 minutes retrograde, which puts it in the scope of both the upcoming and previous lunar eclipses. Okay, Jordyn, please tell us about Oklahoma.
Okay. Oh, so Oklahoma, and I'll probably take more time to talk about this one just because I live it. I was born and raised here, so I really evolutionary dynamics of, on some level, wanting to be born into this place for my own reasons. But so Oklahoma, and this is why I like teaching this, there's a few things that people don't understand about it, is that it is actually more racist than the Deep South, and historians tend to agree with that. And what is sad in regard to that is that before Oklahoma became a state, it was really looked at as a place where people could come, and they thought that it was really progressive at the time. Native Americans, white children, and African American cities in the United States where they were prosperous. It was called Black Wall Street. But the reason why the state became a state, and you can see this in this Pluto retrograde in Gemini, was because of the math. And the United States was trying to atone for this by giving these indigenous people, land, because they had pushed them out. There was a promise of land. You can see the signature of how the Exodus created trauma, with Venus being conjunct Uranus, the south node of Uranus in the 11th house in Sagittarius. This speaks to indigenous culture. It also speaks to the mass exodus as well. And you can see that there was a massive amount of trauma stemming from patriarchal values that created an imbalance within the culture and a lingering collective consciousness of masochism and, well, sadomasochism, south node conjunct Uranus and Capricorn in the first house. And there's a need to really liberate from that. And that's, you can see that the moon in Aries in the third house is squaring the nodal axis, and we're wanting to move towards equanimity by using matriarchal law, but there's a need to really be able to listen to the indigenous and Black culture here and what they're needing in order for that to happen. And it's really interesting to note that with this moon in Aries square the nodal axis and the resolution being the south node and Aquarius, Oklahoma doesn't really have that much of an identity. It's almost kind of laughable. We don't know if we're the South. We don't know if we're the Plains. We don't know if we're, what we do say is we're like the buckle of the Bible Belt is what a lot of us here laugh about. But there's a need in order for us to have a collective identity. When you look at history, the racism that occurred was based on, oh, I gotta slow down, was based on principle. We started with racism. Our first piece of legislation was segregation. And if you look at what happened to the indigenous culture, they opened up agricultural lots here. And that is why the state came into statehood, was it was supposed to be this used to be a really thriving, beautiful rolling hills, fertile land, and they completely raped them of the natural resources here because they didn't listen to the indigenous culture as to how to utilize the land in a natural way. And also there was, if you look at our history, there was the Black Wall Street Massacre, we had the Murrah bombing, we have some of the biggest natural disasters in the United States. I've lived through a few of them. We had the largest tornado that's ever been in the United States happen, interestingly enough, on May 3rd, 1995. And I lived through that one. And so it's just, you can see how crisis continues to perpetuate. And it's because there's not a willingness to listen to what the people are needing or to bring forth more matriarchal natural principles. And it's more patriarchy that keeps, continuing to create trauma within this state. So that is my spiel on Oklahoma in order for it to not, take up a long period of time. I'm really passionate about talking about it because it's not well known what's gone on. And here I kind of say that it's like the United States, like dirty little secret is Oklahoma, and I mean, look at this chart. So
interesting. Yeah, I can tell that you're passionate about it, and it's interesting that that people don't know a whole lot about it, where it is, but
yeah,
we're learning, and maybe we'll continue to. So the recent solar eclipse at 29 degrees Aries, 50 minutes on April 19th, this past April 19th, was conjunct Oklahoma's fourth house progressed Venus. The day after the eclipse, McCurtain County was worried about fallout from a racist recording when the local newspaper identified several county officials who were caught on tape discussing killing journalists and lynching Black people. One commissioner has already resigned, and elected officials have called for the others to step down. And then on Tuesday of this week, a mass murder was reported in the small community of Henrietta, Oklahoma. And yesterday, after unanimously passing the state house, a state Senate bill is headed to the governor's desk for his signature. And, I didn't say what the bill was about, but was that a transgender
Yeah, it was.
ban?
One was passed, one was vetoed. So it was to not allow gender affirming care for minors of children. They said that they've taken that out. They've also, there's been a lot with critical race theory here as well, the past few weeks. And then they also, I believe Governor Stitt vetoed the bill to where, so this just goes back to everything that I'm saying with this particular chart. Made it to where indigenous cultures at their graduation at public schools, they can't wear their oh my gosh, the word is slipping my mind. They can't wear like their, what was the word? Do you remember, Sue?
They're, well, the indigenous, yeah, I know what you're saying.
Garb. Like they weren't able to wear their indigenous garments whenever they graduated. He pretty much passed a law and said you're not allowed to do that. So it's their indigenous cords. So whenever you graduate, you get to wear your cords. And he's not allowing that to happen for indigenous people. So they can represent their tribe.
Yeah. And this has been going on for a couple of years. You and I were talking about this before we started recording, that this is not, this didn't just happen. It's been a couple of years in the making where one young woman was not allowed to put a feather on her mortarboard, as a symbol of her indigenous culture. And yeah, and it's gaining steam. And I realized that I did put on the slide here what I was talking about, that the Senate bill that I was talking about was protecting access to birth control, which I thought was was a bright light, that the bill passed and was headed for the governor to sign. I guess the question is, will he sign it?
Yeah, I think that's interesting because we were like the first one to do the shotgun laws on after Roe versus Wade got overturned, where we took away abortion rights here. No, it was right before Roe versus Wade. So
in preparation for it, right? Yeah.
And as soon as it got overturned, it was a shotgun law that went into effect right way it got overturned.
Right, yeah.
It was like a first of its kind, and all the other states that started doing that followed suit.
Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see, I mean, right, with the eclipse, whether he actually signs it or not.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree, because he's been vetoing a lot of things that would actually, it goes back to this nodal axis. Like they're all things that are based upon, whenever I look at this with the sun Uranus conjunct in the 5th house opposing that moon in the 11th house, this is supposed to get into inclusivity instead of exclusion, right? There's exclusionary values that are taking place here that are excluding the very people that that could actually heal the dynamics that are happening here. So we're talking about indigenous people, we're talking about African Americans, we're talking about natural law, which is giving, sharing, and inclusion. And so it's like this, you know, a few at the powers that would be are really wanting to keep it exclusionary because they feel like their way is the right way. And that's what's sad, is because there is, and this also goes back to right before this state was made, you know, that there were 12 African American men who walked to DC and told Roosevelt, do not make this a state because it's going against the very things that you just signed into law. And so it's just like, that's what the state is working on, is on a collective level to really eradicate exclusivity as opposed of to having inclusion. So, and that's why the men walked there, is they weren't able to go to the what is it called? The, oh my gosh, it starts with a C. The convention where they were writing the documents to make the state. But anyway.
Okay, yeah.
Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, well, yeah,
The Constitutional Convention. Thank
there
you.
you go.
There we go. Mercury, words are falling out of my head. I'm like, what is going on? It's like on the tip of my tongue. Like I'm about to say it and it just goes. So yeah, it's just kind of all of these. And I also think that that's, you know, the sun being in the 11th house, Venus being in the 11th house, the need to liberate from these types of dynamics.
Yeah. And and to that point, for tomorrow's lunar eclipse, it's conjunct their Mercury. Uranus is also exactly opposite that Mercury. Progressed Mars is at 11 degrees Taurus, 40 minutes, where we just had the Mercury cazimi, and the eclipse north node is partile conjunct Hygeia, with eclipse Mercury retrograde in between them. So,
And
it makes me wonder.
It speaks to the, birth control as well, fourth house, fertility, womb stuff. So hopefully he'll sign it into law and won't quit. He won't keep perpetuating and denying women access to help.
Yeah, and you're freezing a little bit, but it also made me wonder, what other shocking news are we going to hear?
Oh yeah.
Okay, so let's see, and then I think we have one more eclipse. The previous lunar eclipse was across the 10th and 4th houses, with the eclipse nodes squaring their Jupiter and the north node on progressed Mars. Any questions or comments before we move on to the last state? Okay, we'll take that as a no. Texas was admitted as a state on December 29th, 1845. On that day, Pluto was in Aries, square the moon in Capricorn, which is also conjunct the south node of Saturn. Mars and Uranus were also conjoined in Aries, opposite fourth house Chiron. Take it away, Jordyn.
Oh goodness. I mean, Pluto and Aries retrograde in the 10th. It's interesting to think about Texas history, how they conceded, they became their own country, for a while. How whenever slavery was abolished, there was a migration of people that went to Texas in order to continue to keep slaves. And you can see with Uranus, Mars, and Aries in that 10th. opposing Chiron and Libra in the fourth, how this has created and perpetuated trauma within the collective, by creating imbalances. The moon being conjunct the south node, Saturn, I think, really speaks for itself, being in Capricorn, going back and squaring that Pluto. It speaks to the ulterior motivations of wanting to create a state for its own benefit, in order to perpetuate kind of these ideologies. But the thing is that there's a need to really get to the bottom of the why and to liberate from those, and then to bring forth better values that are more in alignment with the collective. Texas is a hard one for me to talk about, just because there's a lot there within its collective. I mean, you can see how the south node is in Taurus and it's in the 11th. How, I mean, it's kind of this common thread with all of these things. It's ruled by that Venus in Aquarius in the 9th house. So it's how trauma has perpetuated from dogmatic value systems. It's a very Christian state, I would say, which also speaks to that, dogmatic viewpoints, dogmatic values that have perpetuated trauma within the collective. That would be that south node being ruled by Venus. Also, the north node in Scorpio, and also Scorpio on that 6th house cusp, the need to get to the bottom of how that what types of how can they co-create? How can they actualize with the populace at large? This is a really big thing with that north node being in Scorpio in the 5th house. There's also, I wanted to say, yeah, so the north node of Venus is conjunct Saturn. So there's a need to liberate from the structures and the conditioning that's perpetuated the climate within Texas. It's, the north node of Mars is conjunct Uranus. So that's another repeating signature of just kind of everything that I'm talking about. And it's really because there needs to be a new identity shaped within this collective that has nothing to do with the values that they've had for a very long time within the government systems. So, and then the north node of Uranus being in Gemini in the 12th is a need to dissolve anything that keeps inclusion from happening, and the need to wrap up that cycle, and the need to bring in, more equanimity. That's also trining that Chiron. So that could, be something that happens that would create more security within the society at large there. I also think that it's interesting that Mercury is retrograde and the south node of Venus is sitting, it's in an out of sign conjunction with that Mercury, but it speaks to how there used to be more natural values from the people that were there before. There was a transmigration of people there, and a transmigration of ideas and values that weren't in resonance with the collective, and it created an imbalance within the collective there as well. I feel like this is so heavy talking about all of this.
Yeah, like I said, we chose to go there on on the eve of this eclipse.
It's just so I don't mind talking about it at all, because it does need to be talked about. I don't feel like enough people are, but it does. It makes, I mean, even for me on a personal note, I'm like, well, I can see why I chose to live in the United States, and here we are talking about it because we want to bring it up on some level that's in a factual basis,
Right. Yeah, and I think the Mars retrograde in Gemini, I think kind of pushed the conversation to get started.
I
Pushed it on
agree.
a little bit. Yeah.
And I mean, this is Pluto in Aquarius that we're talking about here. We're wanting for transformation to occur, we have to talk about stuff like this. I mean, I just think it's funny because it's also challenging my conditioning that I didn't really think was there, which was like, I think here in the United States, we generally, there's like this nationalistic quality of like, we're so good, we're awesome. And then whenever you start diving into the history and doing charts like this, I'm like, dang, this is heavy. Like,
Right.
it just really, and I mean, it oozes out. And so, yeah.
That it does. And one little note that I put on the slide here that I'm not sure that I mentioned was that the big old heavy Saturn Pluto conjunction was at 22 degrees 47 minutes, which was very close to the Texas moon on the
Mm.
south node of Saturn. So, I mean, these are heavy um, topics, and the moon, in mundane astrology talks about the people, and the people of Texas certainly have gone through a lot in and I think more is coming up and is becoming you know it's coming out into the world more
They're
so.
wanting to activate that moon. They're wanting to get to the bottom of those core dynamics. And it goes back to, I mean, I think I've said this several times, it takes an extreme to counteract an extreme. And that's what's going on.
Hmm. Yep.
Or in a collective populace, like you're gonna be confronted with the things that you don't want to be confronted with in order to resolve them. And oftentimes how that confrontation takes shape, I mean, look at this. We're talking about eighth house, then we've got Scorpio, North Node Scorpio, North pretty much conjunct that sixth house cusp, and Scorpio's on that cusp. Crisis is going to happen in order to get to the bottom, in order to expose. I mean, this is what this chart is saying. Until that happens, and it's counteracted and there's healing that takes place. That's also why they have a moon in, I mean, not a moon, a sun in the seventh house, is that they're wanting balance. That's the integration point for this state, is they're wanting balance. And Capricorn in its most natural, highest expression is leadership coming from a and so this is saying in this chart, like it wants to go to that. There's an integration point to have leadership, to express what, giving and sharing and inclusion can happen. But in order for that to occur, they're going to have to really get to the bottom of more of these patriarchal underbelly. And until they do, crisis will continue to occur, especially with Scorpio on that sixth house, cusp.
Yeah, and it seems like they kind of go back and forth and back and forth. They make a little bit of progress, and then they, which is a cardinal thing. Couple
Yeah, two
steps
steps
forward.
forward, one step back.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So the recent solar eclipse in the last degree of Aries was conjunct the Texas Jupiter in the first degree of Taurus. Jupiter in mundane astrology refers to laws, the legal system. The 11th house is legislation, allies, friendly neighboring countries. Mercury, of course, is communication or news. On April 22nd, 2023, a Supreme Court ruling left the abortion drug mifepristone on the market, overturning a decision by a Texas judge saying it should never have been approved by the FDA. This after the drug having been available for 20 years. And on May 2nd, Texas Governor Abbott issued a retraction of his comment that mass shooting victims were illegal immigrants. This is the mass shooting that occurred last week. The U.S. also on May 2nd announced that it is preparing to send 1,500 military troops to the southern border to help with the expected surge of migrants following the end of COVID era restrictions. They won't be performing law enforcement duties, but will free up Border Patrol agents to do so. And the mass shooting that I was talking about last week, where the suspect evaded police for a few days before being apprehended. And then Republican lawmakers have pledged to end tenure for university professors. And then Colin Allred, a Democratic state representative, said yesterday he will run for U.S. Senate, challenging Ted Cruz in 2024, which is, the first of hopefully many challenges to, the patriarchal mindset that needs to shift just a tad, shall we say.
Yeah. Well, they had that last big election. There was that one constituent who was a Democrat who went viral, and he actually came very close to winning in Texas. I forget.
Oh,
guy. Very personable. So it
yeah,
does, and that goes to that Capricorn. I mean,
Beto.
Yeah, yes. He was so close, and so
Yeah. So
there's hope on the horizon, I feel like.
yeah, steps forward, and then a little
Well, I mean,
backslide, and then
all
forward
of this,
again.
I feel like the activation that occurred with the Aries new moon eclipse, there's an initiation happening, and it is that initiation of extremes counteracting extremes right now. So it's all coming up and being exposed with this eclipse that's going to happen tomorrow.
Right.
For the next 6 months, we're going to be in this kind of sandwich of wanting to initiate, but in order to initiate, we have to culminate that with that 29 degrees new moon. And the way that we culminate is by getting to the bottom and exposing the things in order to create new values and needs within America. And that's what I really feel like both of these eclipses are about, in tandem with all of these charts that are coming up,
Yes, exactly. Very well said. The lunar eclipse tomorrow occurs exactly conjunct the Texas lunar north node, with the eclipse nodes in a reverse nodal return to the progressed nodes of the state. Their progressed moon is approaching a conjunction to progressed Mars, as transiting Mars is about to go over them, while transiting Jupiter and Eris are conjunct progressed Pluto. I mean, all of this to me just speaks of, activation, social action, and beginnings, and starting to move forward.
Yes. And to the liberation of it, It's
Yes.
definitely activating that Pluto, I feel like.
Yes. Yeah. And then the previous lunar eclipse on US election day was conjunct the Texas South Node on 11/8/22. Governor Abbott was reelected, and shortly afterwards, he renewed disaster declarations for the COVID pandemic and Uvalde shooting, the latter of which had taken place 6 months prior, after the previous solar eclipse. This first solar eclipse, after the nodes moved into Taurus and Scorpio, fell right between the Texas progressed Ceres and Hygeia, and between their Jupiter and South node. The eclipse Pluto was opposite the Texas progressed Mars and square progressed Pluto, involving both the traditional and modern rulers of the eclipse South node and the Texas North node. Transiting Hygeia was conjunct natal Juno and the Texas progressed North node. The Uvalde massacre was a few weeks later. And then here are the transits to the Texas chart on the day of the Uvalde shooting. Jupiter is within an orb of a conjunction with natal Mars and Uranus. Mars is within arc minutes of the 0 Aries point and approaching a Mars return for Texas. Venus had just perfected a conjunction to Eris in the sky, and both were partile conjunct the Texas progressed Pluto. Whereas transiting Mars was conjunct the Texas Hygeia for the eclipse, now asteroid Juno is there. All of this to me indicates the tremendous impact of this event and the eventual potential for activists to bring about social or political change, leading to our eventual evolution.
Absolutely.
And then the coming solar eclipse on October 14th, 2023, will be opposite the Texas Pluto and square their moon. Transiting Pluto will be square progressed Pluto, with the eclipse north node conjunct 11th house progressed Pluto. And this eclipse is being called the Great American Eclipse #2 as it crosses the United States, starting about in the same spot as the Great American Eclipse #1. Please note that the transiting lunar nodes will have shifted into Aries and Libra by the time of this eclipse season. So the nodal rulers will have switched with Mars ruling the north node and Venus the south node.
Yep. I think that that's going to create a situation on a collective level where, man, I feel like I sound like a broken record player, but a lot of dynamics of the imbalances are going to be coming up, in order for us to really evolve out of them. And it'll be interesting because Pluto is going to be squaring those,
Right. And this is, this as the US has their Pluto return, it's all, it's all.
You can't make astrology up.
No, you can't. No, you can't.
It's here because it's wanting, there's a collective undercurrent of wanting to evolve out of these dynamics, and
Exactly.
it's a strong one.
Yes.
And so we get an opportunity when Pluto goes back into Capricorn to dot I's and cross some T's before Pluto moves back into
you broke up, but before it moves back into Aquarius, right?
Yeah.
So here's the path of the Great American Eclipse #2. You can see that it goes right across Texas, as will the following solar eclipse on April 8th, 2024. And the point where the two eclipse paths cross is right about Uvalde, Texas. The path of the April 8th eclipse comes up through Mexico, over the corner of Oklahoma, then through Arkansas, Missouri, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, the corner of Pennsylvania, across New York, Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine, then on to Newfoundland. And here are the two eclipses together, showing that they are opposite to one another, with Mercury of the second one in the outside ring, conjunct the north node of the first. You can also see here that the April 8th eclipse is exactly to the minute conjunct Chiron in Aries. Also, its south node is right between the Mercury and Pallas of the October 14th eclipse, and its Ceres is square the former's Chiron. Unfortunately, these may be more indications of grief, but also of the healing to come. And then here are the two eclipses around the Texas statehood chart. As you can see, Pluto is back in Capricorn for the first one, and then, as Jordyn pointed out, back then into Aquarius for the second one, as it squares the Texas Jupiter. And as I said previously, in this mundane astrology, Jupiter speaks of the justice system, and in addition, wealth and bankers. The 11th house is about legislation and friendly neighboring countries and allies. The moon represents the common people, and Pluto is about metamorphosis and regeneration, sometimes violence as well. These mundane astrology significations I got from Deb Holding's Skyscript website and a Vedic astrology website called Ganesha Speaks. I'll put the links in the description of the video. And let's see, this is the April 8th eclipse around the Texas natal and progress charts, showing that the eclipse conjoins the Texas Pluto and squares their moon.
It almost feels like that'll be an access point for change to occur.
That was my whole point for, for doing this, is especially when I saw that one eclipse exactly to the minute conjunct Chiron. I mean, that's an opportunity for healing.
Absolutely.
If we take it.
And I think Sue, I'm always amazed with how your mind works, like how you were able to look at this and see how it X marks the spot of Uvalde, Texas, and like the tragedy that's occurred. And like, hopefully that's the thing that, I mean, we're already seeing it. I mean, it was children. So it's like the thing that's already kind of getting people to really, it's almost as if there was this tremendous amount of loss has exposed, and it's with Uranus and Aquarius being kind of in the mix of all of this. I always liken it to a jackhammer. It takes one blow, like one event, and you don't even know how far the cracks, expand or go, or how far reaching that they are. And you don't know until a length of time. And so it's like it's completely with that event. It's almost like it's that is what's exposing a lot of the things within the government right now, and getting people to collaborate and get together and to unify, to talk about it, to see the change, because they're just sick of it. And it was a direct result of, I think for a long time, help, they kind of put that on a pedestal. And then what ended up happening is, well, we saw what happened. And so it's like, now I think that that's also what's when people have protection taken away, they want to be able to figure out how to protect themselves. And this also has to deal with that nodal axis of survival and self-preservation. So kind of all of these dynamics coming up,
So you broke up a little bit when you said something was put on a pedestal.
Well, just like law enforcement, that they'll always be there to protect. So it's like the events that occurred have triggered a survival and self-preservation instinct. And this goes along with the nodal axis of what's occurring. So it's like, it actually, what happened was, it's having people come together in a really big way, because they're like, who is going to protect us,
Right. And it's basically, we have to protect ourselves. We have to protect each other, Yeah. So this is the path of the 2017 Great American Eclipse #1, showing that it first touched the U.S. in the Pacific Northwest, went across the country, and then down through the southeast section of the country. And here's the Great American Eclipse numbers 1 and 2, showing that they both entered the country at about the same point and then travel along different paths across the country, which I thought was fascinating. And just as kind of a side note, I noticed, a lot of correlations after that first Great American Eclipse of things that happened, that first happened in the Pacific Northwest and then kind of moved across the country. One of which was COVID. A lot of the cases of COVID started in the Pacific Northwest and then kind of moved across the country. So this may be this is a second wave of new thinking. Let's hope. And then here is the North America map showing the path of the two Great American Eclipses and the April 8th one. You can see that the two coming ones also involve Mexico, Central and South America. And then this next one I thought was really wild. These are all of the eclipses that have touched or will touch Texas starting in 2012 and through 2024. And then adding the Great American #1 to it. And going back to 2012, the solar eclipse was conjunct progressed Jupiter and asteroid Karma in the Texas chart. It was also square transiting Neptune and asteroid Hygeia, which were conjunct progressed Saturn, which was conjunct progressed Eris. Transiting Chiron was on the midheaven opposite Mars and Virgo. I mean, again, repeating themes where we just, seeing opportunities for healing just abound. And let's see, then we've got one more, the solar eclipse. Oh, this is the solar eclipse opposite. This is the one in 2014, opposite the Jupiter of Texas. And then these are those first two touching Texas in 2012 and 2014. And then up in the right-hand corner, you can just see the very edge of the Great American Eclipse. So it's didn't really particularly impact Texas per se, but the other two eclipses before that did. And then here, you can see up in the right-hand corner, there's a little hint of it. And then this, when looking a little more closely at the direction of the eclipse that the eclipse paths took, I noticed that the two that touched Texas before now all came into and even ended in Texas, whereas the next two will kind of pass through on their way elsewhere. What this means is anybody's guess, and I'm sure there'll be more of a story to tell. And then finally, just for perspective, here are the Texas eclipses between 2012 and 2024 on the map of the world. And what I thought was interesting was that the two eclipses I mentioned that ended in Texas started in Southeast Asia and Russia, respectively. All food for thought. So let's see. These are the references that I mentioned. Does anybody have any questions or comments? I'm going to put the references.
Christina did say, and this was when we were talking about Texas, she said, at the Saturn-Uranus square in February 2021, the Texas power grid failed for nearly a week during an ice storm. And I remember that.
That's right. When was that?
That was February 2021, because that ice storm impacted Oklahoma as well. We didn't have power for a week, but it wasn't our grid. With them, they didn't have heat or anything because it kind of reminded me of what's been going on in South Africa, of just the government not spending money to take care of the people or the things that actually take care of the people. That is why that power grid failed. is because they didn't ever put the money into replacing what needed to be replaced.
Amazing. Yeah. Yeah. And you know what? I'm going to stop my share.
Oh,
And
wow, Christina.
so let's take a look at the chat and see. Actually, you know what I'm going to do? Let's, Christina, shall I unmute you? Let me ask you to unmute if you.
Sure. Well, just for fun, I live in that red X.
Lucky
You live
you, huh?
where?
Yeah, I'm in it. I'm not sure whether I should leave or
Where did you say you lived? It cut out. I'm sorry.
In the red X.
yeah,
Oh.
go for the red X where it all crosses all those times. There I am.
Okay. So you live kind of close to me then, Christina.
Well, you're in Oklahoma.
I'm your
Right.
neighbor just north, huh?
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's interesting that you chose to join us today.
Okay, well, okay, let me give you this other piece of it. When I looked at the post floating by, I saw the picture with the X and read, okay, the eclipses and the states. My mind went straight to an interpretation of what it means to be in these areas that are just X and X and X. And so anyway, I thought it's it's great to have the state charts to look at. It's very making change in Texas is very difficult. The system is gamed.
Yes.
The
Yes.
it's get with gerrymandering and
Nepotism, it's everything.
it's really it, I'm I'm a native and I'm at a low point in my entire life with my love for my state. I'm just
I hear you.
hopefully it's been difficult and
I can imagine because I mean, just you know, from an outsider's perspective, and having visited there, you know, a few times, it's beautiful. And, but there's such opposites, and I guess, you know, they say opposites attract, but there's so many opposite, you know, viewpoints and stuff, and you know, the clashes and the, you know, but you know, looking at this does give me hope eventually. You know, I'm unfortunately, I don't think it happened. We know it doesn't happen overnight, but I think, you know, that I'm really hopeful with this, with the eclipse, the 29-degree 50 minutes of Aries eclipse. It's like an end of a beginning to me. You know, it's like we're really doing this now. You know, we're really moving ahead. And you know, I just, you know, fingers crossed.
You know,
it,
Christina, the fact that you're I mean, I love whenever I run into people who are from Texas or Oklahoma, in evolutionary astrology or on the message board, because I'm like, there's another one, finally. So it really speaks about your own evolution. And also, were you born in Texas?
yes,
Okay.
I'm a rare native Texan.
Yeah. Yeah. That's where my family is from Texas. Gatesville, like Mound, right outside of Waco.
Mm-hmm.
So
Right.
and then my mom's side is from Texarkana. But you know, you got to ask yourself, like, on a soul level, like, why did you want to be born there? Like, I know for me, why I chose Oklahoma is because I was so tired of hiding. that I had to be in a place like this to be like, I can't hide anymore, like on a soul level. So, you know, and that's why I do classes on Oklahoma. So you've got to ask yourself, like, why did you choose to be born there and to be the awesome human being that you are in kind of this place that is very polarizing, you know? At least
Well,
that's what I do here. I'm
I,
like,
I know, I'm very attracted to the energy of 30 north latitude. And as it happens, my front door is on the money on
oh my,
30 north. And
oh,
I have lived in places along that line, and there's an energy to it, and I know
mhm.
that is one thing that pulls me to it. So,
That's fascinating. I love that. And I love that you have that correlation too.
Yeah. And I love that you joined us today to talk about it.
Yeah, same here because I was kind of worried. You know, well, you get this, like, especially Christina, you know, like I'm like, I'm sitting here talking about this heavy stuff, and I'm like, I hope no one's getting angry at me on the message board. And here you are from Texas, and you made your comment about the electoral college as a shadowy remnant of slavery. And I was like, okay, I feel a lot more at ease now.
yeah,
Yeah. And
I have
I think
I have Mercury conjunct Pluto. I will deep dive with you any day.
well,
Okay, awesome.
you
Oh, I
I
love
don't know
it.
if you heard me say, I don't know if you came in afterwards, but I said that my Mars is conjunct Jordyn's Pluto in Scorpio. So we went there.
Yeah. We were
Oh,
talking about it before, but it also, I feel like I told Sue, I was like, I'm just gonna give the facts. And I think here in Oklahoma, whenever I do the class, the people who watch it, I know, appreciate that I'm being honest. But whenever you're doing this on such a larger platform, and I'm not just talking about Oklahoma, I'm like, you know, I just have to, you know, it's a little more uncomfortable for me, you know?
yes, and you just called it the way you saw it.
No, absolutely. But it's the unknown and the
Mhm.
unfamiliar. That's why I'm like, so I loved whenever you said what you did, Christina, because I was like, okay, I feel, you know, like
You know, um,
I feel there.
you certainly don't look like you're old enough to remember the harmonic convergence, but
I'm in my 30s. I look younger than I am. I hear that
He
all
was
the time
probably
at least.
born right about that time.
Yeah.
I was living in a town on 30 North called in Texas called Wimberley. That is a very at that time very esoteric, wonderful, magical place there. And I was working for the local newspaper while I was, on the run from civilization and living in this little tiny town in Texas. And so I wrote a series of long articles about the harmonic convergence, but I was very careful with my language because there are many, many words you can use to convey an idea without using words that the redneck underbelly of Texas has been trained to be triggered by. So if you just don't use those trigger words, you can actually communicate without uh, without them shutting off.
That's
Good.
also
So
your Mercury on your Pluto.
Yeah.
yes, so I did 6 very long feature articles, a series over time, leading up to the harmonic convergence. Okay, so you don't know where you're going with that. You write it, it goes out into the world, and you really don't know what's happening. And I had an idea that uh, there was a kind of a sacred mountain within Wimberley. And so I suggested that maybe for the harmonic convergence that, that a few of us could meet up there and watch the sunrise. Of course, throwing this out there, you never know what happens. So at about 4 o'clock in the morning, I had suggested to someone that we make a stairway to heaven, and she had donations of sand and candles and made luminaria bags, and there were 222 steps carved up this mountain that were lit with the stairway to heaven.
Oh,
That was
lovely.
pretty awesome.
That is
When I
awesome.
when I climbed up there in the dark, it was completely packed with people.
Wow.
And it was dark, so you didn't know who anybody was. And so it was lovely and beautiful. But as the sun rose, the naysayers were all there. And the president of the bank, the real estate developer, all of these people that you would think not in 1,000,000 years would they show up for this. All there.
Wow.
Several hundred people crammed onto the top of this mountain to celebrate and, look forward to a better future. So there's a lot of rhetoric that gets inflammatory, but people show up when there's
Yeah.
hopefulness for change.
And the harmonic convergence was something that hit the mainstream big time.
It did.
People were talking about it. That I remember people asking me about it. That I thought, whoa, I love it.
I had a lot of fun with those articles. I got to, write in a very above board way, but drop in some little esoteric type things that,
When was
you
that?
know,
80.
I want to say 86-ish, something like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, that sounds about right. 86, 87, maybe.
That was right before I was born.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Yeah.
we brought you in.
Okay.
I was born in 89, January 1st of 89.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
Good.
Well, this
Well,
has
it's
been
pretty
awesome.
it's powerful to think about what the greater messages being brought in with these eclipses
Exactly.
tracking here.
Mm-hmm.
Looks
Yeah,
to me
and-
like it looks to me like Texas is going to be a catalyst for change.
Yes,
Absolutely.
it does me too. And Christina, you're going to be right in the middle of it again, building a stairway to heaven,
That's right.
which just gave
Well,
me
thank you.
chills.
That's a
The what's his name? It's on the tip of my tongue. Not Robert Plant. The other one. He lives in Texas. Wrote Stairway to Heaven.
oh.
Name's on the tip of my tongue. I can't get it.
Yeah.
I should
Yeah.
know that because my son's name is Zeppelin.
Yeah. Not Robert Plant. It's the other one.
There's there are, when you think about an area that then the eclipses cross over it, let's say 250 square miles or more, a huge area, that there are huge underground aquifers. And when you go up near, there's a place called Enchanted Rock, and it's a batholith sphere made of granite that goes they think all the way down to the center of the earth. And so what this makes actually is like a giant resonating chamber. Like the clapper is that sphere at Enchanted Rock, and then 5 huge aquifers, hollow underground with water, are like resonating chambers all this energy is going right through that.
Wow.
Robin, it's Jimmy Rogers.
Ah.
Jimmy Rogers for Stairway to Heaven. Him and Robert Plant.
Oh, okay.
Okay,
Uh,
I gotta pop off of here, ladies.
Yeah,
Okay.
we've been going for just almost 2 hours, so I think I think we're done.
We
Yeah.
had some
We're done
fun.
with part one anyhow. Thank you so
Nice.
much.
Okay.
This was wonderful.
I had
Thank
fun.
you
Thank
to
you.
Jordyn. Jordyn, you did an awesome job with your EA analysis, and I really appreciate you for who you are.
Aw, thank you, Sue. The feeling's mutual. I love you.
Aw, thanks.
All right.
See you next time.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.